Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. LaTurner, is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My colleagues have called this committee hearing to attempt to draw a causal relationship between the American Rescue Plan and any economic growth that occurred in 2021 following the early days of the coronavirus pandemic. The truth is that the American Rescue Plan Act and its flawed disbursement formula turned into a $350 billion slush fund. And rural communities in my home state of Kansas receive fewer federal aid dollars per capita, while Democrats, mayors, and governors who chose to implement crippling lockdowns were rewarded with large slush funds. Adding insult to injury, Kansas is now among the states that are experiencing the greatest fallout from the bill, with inflation rates higher than the national average. Over the course of 2021, prices in Kansas rose by about 7.6%, outpacing the national average inflation rate of 6.8%. Countless economic experts on both sides of the aisle warned that this reckless spending would have a significant inflationary impact, but the Democrat majority failed to heed those warnings, and now hardworking Americans are paying for that mistake. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle often talk about helping the working class, but that is exactly who feels the pain of inflation. 1 year ago, a Kansan could buy a gallon of gas at just over $2.50. Today, that price has risen to $3.38 per gallon, with no end in sight to the increase. And it doesn't stop there. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the cost of eggs is now 11% higher, and milk is 9.2% higher. My state is facing the highest inflation we have seen since the 1980s. And my working class constituents are the ones who are hurt the most. As a former state treasurer, I understand the value in helping state and local governments implement changes that the federal government has mandated. And at the time that ARPA was passed, I implored the Biden administration to responsibly allocate the $1 trillion in COVID relief already provided for by Congress. Unfortunately, Democrats authorized trillions of dollars of wasteful deficit spending that ultimately had little to do with pandemic recovery, and which disproportionately imposed the consequences of the resulting inflation on my constituents. Mr. Jaffe, the Democrats' stated purpose of this hearing is to explore how the American Rescue Plan contributed to low unemployment and record high GDP. Yet, the Congressional Budget Office released a report prior to ARPA's passage that GDP would return to pre-pandemic levels without any new congressional stimulus package. In your view, to what extent is there a causal relationship between ARPA passage in March of 2021 and the growth in national GDP?
I think it's fairly limited. As you stated, CBO and many other experts already noted that the economy was bouncing back very smartly from the recession. So this added stimulus at the wrong time of the business cycle was really very suboptimally spent.
I'm going to stick with you, Mr. Jaffe. There's a lot of concern on the Republican side that $350 billion of ARPA was used mainly as a rainy day fund for a lot of entities. Here in DC, for example, Mayor Bowser used $70 million to transition homes to green energy. Now, we can debate the merits of that project, but it hardly falls into the category of pandemic-related expenses. I'm concerned about the unsustainable debt burden that Congress is placing on the backs of our children and grandchildren with these sweeping spending bills, which is why I co-sponsored a balanced budget amendment earlier in my service as a representative. Can you discuss the broader impact of ballooning our national debt, which just exceeded $30 trillion, and the threat that publicly held federal debt poses to our economic future?
Yes, definitely. Because this publicly held debt has become so large, now over 100% of GDP, and of course the total government debt is well over 100% of GDP, this really is a systematic threat to budget stability. If interest rates return to normal levels, if, for example, we get to the point where interest rates match the inflation rate, that's going to blow a giant hole in the federal budget. And we'll be at a time when it'll be very difficult for us to borrow more money because financial markets will be losing faith in the America's ability to and willingness to repay its debt.
One more quick question. In your testimony, you discussed the limited effects of the pandemic on state tax revenues and compared those findings to Census Bureau data. Can you explain how you came to your conclusion and elaborate on your findings as quickly as you can?
The census does a quarterly survey of state and local revenues, and I was basing it on that.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.